People wouldn't believe what was going to happen until the flood actually arrived and took them all away. So shall my coming be. 2 men will be working together in the fields. One will be taken, the other left. 2 women will be going about their household tasks. One will be taken and the other left. So be prepared, for you know not what day your Lord is coming. What does all this mean? It means exactly what it says. Any minute, any second could be the last chance that anyone has to give himself to Jesus. Because when he returns, it will happen that fast. So Christian, be alert. And friend, if you haven't given your life to Christ, do it. And do it now. Because the rapture will come and Christ will return. It says in the Bible that he will come as a thief in the night.
Welcome to the Magnificast, a podcast about Christianity and leftist politics. I'm Matt Bernico, and I teach media studies at Greenville University in Greenville, Illinois. And I'm the guy handing out all the candy this Halloween.
And I'm Dean Detloff, a PhD student at the Institute for Christian Studies in Toronto, and I'm your candy inspector. No safety razors here. You're good to go.
Oh, thanks. That's really nice of you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Hand them out.
Cool. Well, last week we said that we were done with evangelicalism, but we lied a little bit.
Are you ever really done with evangelicalism? Is it ever done with you?
Yeah, that's the better question. Is it ever done with you? The answer is no. So this week we're gonna switch over. We're shifting gears. We're transitioning into a different sort of vibe, and that is we're doing some spooky stuff for the next 2 weeks. In the spirit of Halloween, the spookiest time of the year, we're going to focus on some spooky stuff in Christianity. And I think there's no real better place to start than taking a good hard look at the movie A Thief in the Night, the best and first, I think, evangelical horror movie that was ever made.
Yeah, Heath Carter mentioned watching it last week when we talked to him.
Yeah, it's kind of like a classic in evangelicalism. I remember I watched it when I was in youth group, and at the time I thought about how lame it was because it was made in 1972. And it's pretty campy to say the least. Now watching it as an adult though, I think I have a new appreciation for the film. It's bad, but kind of awesome. It's definitely it's a cool and interesting movie that has I don't know. It's hard to say I don't like it because I do. I think it's really fun, and maybe I think that for all the wrong reasons. But we're gonna get to it in a minute. We're gonna talk about The Thief of the Night, and if you've never seen it, don't worry. We'll tell you what it's all about and what the big ideas are here. But in light of this very spooky season that we're in, Dean, the people of Reddit, they've been banging at my digital door all day long, asking, pleading with me, Dean, answer these questions for us. And
I'm here.
You're gonna have to do it now. You're gonna have to answer these questions for the people of Reddit. Okay.
I've had a few weeks to rest up, and now I'm ready.
Good. Replenishing your mana. Thank you.
That's right.
Good. So here's the question that they need asked. That they asked me to ask you. Okay. Is dressing up as ghosts / vampires / monsters sinful? I don't understand why dressing up as these things for Halloween is sinful. We aren't celebrating these things as good. If anything, vampires / zombies / monsters are vilified in culture around Halloween time. Someone think of those monsters. And I don't understand why it's wrong to dress up as ghosts. Ghosts are neutral. They can be good or bad. Could I get your perspective on this? So, Dean, can you lay down the law here on this one?
Yeah, well, first of all, not all these things are the same. I think that's very important. In a certain sense, isn't everyone dressed up as a ghost all the time?
Because in the future, you'll be dead and you'll look like this.
Yeah, exactly. If you died right now, that's how you would look as a ghost. You're already dressed up as a ghost right this moment.
That's a troubling idea.
That's why I always wear my Sunday best. So,
yeah, that makes sense.
The criteria we established in the past is that it is sinful only if you can't imagine Jesus doing it. And if you can, then it's not sinful. So the real question here is, can you imagine Jesus at a costume party? And I think so. Would Jesus dress up as a vampire? It's hard to say. I need to do some thinking about this really quick. Just some quick prayer.
Yeah.
I think that I could imagine Jesus with some fangs, but just for fun. Just silly fangs. And that would be the joke, right? He would be like, yeah, of course I'm Jesus Christ. But today, the only day, I get to dress up as the Dark Lord. And I'm going to revel in it, you know? Why not?
Yeah, why not? I mean, could you imagine Jesus as a Frankenstein? I mean, I suppose so.
He kind of is one, if you think about it.
I'm thinking about it, and I'm thinking you're right. So here's the thing that really upsets me about this question, and you didn't even mention it, and I think that's kind of messed up, Dean. This user says that ghosts are neutral. They can be good or bad.
Right,
and I don't know about that, though. I don't know.
I think that's true.
I don't know, but if you're a ghost and you're good, what are you even doing here anymore? The only reason, I mean, ghosts are here because they have unfinished business. And that doesn't mean you're probably going to be a good ghost, does it?
What if your unfinished business is doing good in the world, though?
So I'm basing this off of not the scriptures, but of a TV show called Supernatural. And in that one, the ghosts aren't good ever. So I don't know. It's kind of beyond my imagination, I suppose.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's just TV. That's not real life.
It's not the real life ghosts that we all know about, for sure.
You can't let fiction dictate what you think about ghosts.
Okay, so here we go. We have an answer. Is it sinful to dress up as ghosts, vampires, or monsters? No, it's not. There you go, Reddit. Like and subscribe.
Well, I'm going to turn the tables on you this week, Matt.
Uh-oh. Okay.
Because I have found a Reddit that I know will be specifically tailored to your own expertise. It is from 4 years ago, so
urgent.
I don't know. Yeah, hopefully they've gotten an answer by now. But here's the question, and then I'm going to read it as well because there's some additional details. The question is, what's the difference between trick or treat and trunk or treat? A lot of churches seem to have trunk or treats as an alternative to Halloween trick or treating, but they seem exactly the same, except trunk of treats are in a church parking lot instead of in your neighborhood, and you hand out candy from your car. Edit. I'm asking more about the spiritual and religious differences, not necessarily the practical and logistical differences. It's my observation that a lot of churches promote and host trunk or treats while simultaneously warning against Halloween. So, Matt, what are the spiritual and religious differences between a trick or treat and a trunk or treat?
Now that's a good question. So I've been to a trunk or treat or two in my time, and I've been to a trick or treat or two in my time. And what's the spiritual difference? Well, despite the question asker's, I think, intentions and undergirding assumptions, trick or treat is actually more Christian because, okay, so Christianity, it's about a lot of things, but it's mostly about Jesus knocking at the door of your heart, and only you on the other side of the door can answer. And that's like a lot like Halloween. You have to choose to answer the door, to ignore the trick-or-treaters altogether. There's that. So I think trick-or-treating is more theologically sound. A trunk-or-treat is bad. It's bad theologically. I'm going to say that because Jesus, it's just like you just got your trunk open to Jesus. No, I don't know if that's right. No, I can't do it. I don't think so. I don't think there's anything here. I think trick-or-treating is just the way to go. A trunk or treat, no, it's bad news. It's garbage. It's saying, I don't trust you, neighbors, with your candy.
Yeah, I only trust these people in this parking lot that my parents brought me to.
Absolutely.
Because they won't let me spend time with my secular friends.
They won't let me dress up like Freddy Krueger with my secular friends.
Secular Freddy Krueger.
I'm glad Freddy Krueger is secular. I think that's probably for the best.
Taking Freddy Krueger to church. Well, I've got one more question for you that will lead us in to this
All right.
film.
Okay.
Are you ready?
Yeah, I think so.
Here it goes. For some odd reason, I've always wanted to stay here during the rapture. That's the headline. Here's the details. I've always wanted to stay on Earth during the rapture, just to watch the world end in first person. You know, grab the popcorn and watch it unfold. If I die before the 7 years ends, oh well. I won't miss my family because they'll be in heaven. I'm a Christian, but I want to stay here. I mean, the world's going to end anyways, so why not enjoy it from a first-person view, grab a Mountain Dew, sit on my front porch, and watch the show? Does anyone else want to as well? Or am I just odd like that?
Yeah. What a twisted and skewed perspective on things, huh?
I know.
So, yeah, I mean, you could do that. It'd be bad to do that, though. Because it would mean that you can't get saved until strategically after the rapture. I think. And like, what if you died accidentally before that? That'd be bad.
The catch here is knowing enough about the rapture to know how to not get raptured.
Right. And I think what's really odd about this question is how much emphasis this person is putting on the first person perspective. And I can tell just from sort of the tone and that emphasis that this person is a gamer. They're definitely about this. They love those first person shooters. They like their Call of Duty. They like Doom. Definitely Doom. They want to play Quake competitively with their friends. They're probably playing Minecraft. And they don't like the real-time strategy games, the ones where you're looking down on sort of the map from above, because that's the heaven view after during the rapture. You're looking down, you're controlling the troops, etc. So I think this person is wrong in doing that.
All right. Well, I guess they're just odd like that is what it comes down to.
They're just a real quirky, random person. Yeah.
Well, this person doesn't have to wait until the end of time or the end of human history, pre-rapture anyway, to find this out, because they could just watch this movie called A Thief in the Night. How's that for a transition?
It was a good one, man. I think you did great.
Well, I'm a professional journalist, so...
You're a professional journalist, and now I can give you a review on LinkedIn for your transition skills.
That's right. I'm gonna have to put that skill down. So maybe we should. Let's see. There's so many ways in here, but maybe we should just start as we often start now when we talk about films and TV shows, by just looking at the Wikipedia description of this film.
Because we could summarize it, but why? I mean, someone else has done it for us.
Exactly. Let me think here. Should I read it in full or should I read it in parts?
Let's read it in parts.
Okay. All right. So here's the brief plot summary in parts, according to paragraph breaks from this professional Wikipedia writer. They say this, in media res, this is the beginning of the movie. A young woman named Patty Meyer awakens one morning to a radio broadcast announcing the disappearance of millions around the world, showing that the rapture has occurred. She finds that her family has disappeared and that she has been left behind. The United Nations sets up an emergency government system called the United Nations Imperium of Total Emergency, or UNITE.
It's a great acronym. They definitely worked hard to get the full UNITE.
Yeah, that's right. And they declare those who do not receive the mark of the beast identifying them with UNITE will be arrested. That's the beginning.
Yeah, that's great. So before we get to like the next paragraph, but what happens next in the film, I think it's really important. In media res, wow, that's a really great film term to mean that it starts in the middle of the movie.
That's right.
And then, so what you get in the beginning is what happens right after the rapture occurs. This woman, Patty, she hears about it. She's freaked out. Her husband's gone. And then you get a bunch of flashbacks. And when I say a bunch of flashbacks, I mean 30 minutes of flashbacks. It's fantastic.
It's pretty good. You get all of Patty's life story in about 30 minutes.
It's all you need, really. Good. Should we say anything else, or do you want to go to the next chunk here?
No, the next chunk, once we get into the flashbacks, this is where the meat is.
This is where the meat of the movie, yeah.
Yeah, this is the meat of the movie. We just got you through the antipasta. All right.
The salad of the movie.
Several flashbacks occur to times in Patty's life before the rapture has happened. The flashbacks also show her two friends and their different approaches to Christianity. One who considers Jesus Christ her only Lord and only Savior, and the other, Diane, who does not take it seriously. Yikes, Diane. Patty considers herself a Christian because she occasionally reads her Bible and goes to church regularly, where the pastor is really an unbeliever. Well, that's editorialized.
Yeah.
She refuses to believe the warnings of her friends and family that she will go through the great tribulation if she does not accept Jesus Christ as her only Lord and only Savior. One morning, she awakens to find that her family and millions of others have suddenly disappeared, as we've already noticed in media res. There's a great editorialization that goes on further, but let's just take a break and pause here. These several flashbacks, we're already getting into the world of this film.
Yeah, building out the world. It's just a regular 1970s kind of world, and Patty goes to church, but she's not super into it. The pastor as an unbeliever part is very funny. There's a scene where Patty is in church and the pastor's talking, and it's actually like a pretty good sermon. It basically is like, hey, does it really matter if you believe in the virgin birth? Does it really matter if you really believe in a literal Adam and Eve? And sounds pretty good to me, actually. But Patty is sitting in the pew and she's like checking her watch and like, when's this going to be over? And then she starts like reading the Bible instead of listening. And like, Patty, please listen to your pastor.
Yeah, well, that scene is after she's encountered this young evangelical. I don't know if I should call him a man or a boy. He's kind of in between. But he is going around telling people about the coming tribulation and all that kind of stuff. She hears about it, and her boyfriend or her friend's boyfriend of like 3 days is like making fun of it, and he's like, if you believe in all that stuff, you'd always be checking your watch because the rapture could happen at any time. And the guy's like, yeah, it could. And she's at church, and that's exactly what she's doing. He got through to her.
It's great.
All right, let's here. I'll round out the rest of the movie, and then through this description, and then we'll pick apart the rest of the film, pull out some scenes. But I love this description on Wikipedia because it was also written by an obvious fan, a true believer in the story of this movie. So they go on to say, Patty seems a strange breed of person who both refuses to trust Jesus Christ as her only Lord and only Savior, great phrase, and also refuses to take the mark. Patty desperately tries to avoid the law and the mark, but is captured by Unite. Patty escapes, but after a chase is cornered by Unite on a bridge and falls from the bridge to her death. And here's the twist. Patty then awakens, and the entire film's plot is revealed to have been a dream.
Yeah.
She's tremendously relieved. However, her relief is short-lived when the radio announces that millions of people have in fact disappeared. Horrified, Patty frantically searches for her family only to find them missing too. Traumatized and distraught, Patty realizes that the rapture has indeed occurred and she has been left behind. In the ensuing plot, the questions are whether or not she will be caught, as she was in her dream, and whether or not she will choose to take the mark to escape execution.
Yeah, it's probably worth saying that there's about 4 other films that happen in the same universe after this one's over, so you can find out what happens to Patty if you want to. But let's just talk about this movie right now and what it means for us. And Jesus Christ is our only Lord and only Savior. Again, the strangest way to phrase that one, but okay.
That phrase appears in just this description 3 times in one paragraph.
And nowhere in the movie, actually.
Yeah, that's right.
So someone out there is going through something.
I guess so. Yeah, all right. Matt, well, let's just start. What were some of your favorite scenes in this film?
Yeah, okay. The movie is you watch it and it's clearly a horror film. It uses so many tropes from horror as a genre, and it mixes those tropes pretty well with evangelical Christianity and dispensationalism, end times theology, and so on. So all that to say, it's, I mean, a movie that was definitely low budget in 1970, but it's still like actually kind of good. And there's some really interesting things about it, like cinematographically. Whoops. Yeah. But sort of as far as the actual film goes, I think the things that stand out to me most, I think like the movie itself, like the storyline thrown together, it could mean it's like whatever. There's so many weird moments in it. But Larry Norman's song, which is in the beginning of the movie, which is called "I Wish We'd All Been Ready," is the thing that like sticks with me, I think, the most. It's performed by this like weird youth group band in the very beginning of the movie, where this like this not a boy but not yet a man is kind of preaching this end times gospel. And it's performed in this really strange way. Like the Larry Norman song itself is like unsettling and kind of eerie, but it's sung by these like two women and this like weird youth pastory guy on a keyboard, and it's like really unsettling. And the song plays a few times throughout the movie, and every single time it's just like, God, this is creepy. Why is it like this?
Yeah, it's really unsettling.
Yeah, it is for sure. So there's that. The movie honestly reminds me a ton of being at like Christian summer camp. I don't think,
Yeah.
I mean, like at Christian summer camp for sure, like, you're hit over the head with like, say the sinner's prayer, accept Jesus into your heart, et cetera, et cetera. Probably never quite like this hard, but the exact sort of things that people would say to you in those types of spaces were how this movie felt to me.
Yeah.
Extremely emotive appeals to accept a really esoteric type of theology is maybe the best way to say it.
Yeah.
I don't know. There's a lot more that we could probably say about the movie, but what about you, Dean? What sticks out to you?
Yeah, well, just what you were just saying is right, that I feel like every scene in this movie is just a kind of like canonical moment that evangelicals have to have in their faith life. It's really like the life cycle of an evangelical in many respects. Because you have like, there's a scene where a little girl accepts Jesus into her heart. She prays the prayer after being horrified by the possibility of being left behind. Pretty common story. You have like, the adults trying to work out their own like faith, whether they're in the evangelical camp or not. Like everybody's kind of trying to sort it out and put it together. And you have the end where they're either raptured or not. And I think it's also fascinating because it presents the evangelical view of the rest of the world in a really intriguing way.
Yeah.
I don't know, like you really get an idea of like the universe that evangelicals think that they live in is this film. Like it's fictional, but also it kind of isn't. Like it's like a speculative documentary in some ways, in a really bizarre way. Anyway, yeah, lots of scenes that stick out to me. Probably my favorite one, though, and we'll come back to it, but just to get it on the table, there's a moment when there is a pastor preaching who's like a dispensationalist pastor, a tribulation evangelical pastor, and he's talking about the rapture and all this kind of stuff. And he's going on and on in his sermon about, whatever, how the Bible works. And he gets to this point where he tells this story about his friend, where he says, like, yeah, my friend, he got up in the middle of the night and he took off all his pajamas. And then he went downstairs. And then his wife woke up and she looked over and there were all his pajamas. And she freaked out because she thought the rapture had happened and she was left behind. Well, anyway, on to the next point. Like, there's no point attached to it at all, which, first of all, is extremely realistic. That's exactly how every sermon is at an evangelical church, just disconnected anecdotes about a pastor's life. But the very next scene is a little girl in the kitchen, and there's, like, some food on the stove and nobody attending it. And she suddenly comes to the conclusion that she must have been left behind, and she's, like, yelling for her mom, who doesn't come right away. And she's, traumatized. And then the mom does come. And then she goes and prays the sinner's prayer or whatever to be saved. And I thought it is actually like the perfect picture of how evangelicalism traumatizes children. Like, inadvertently, the film presents it as this like moment of, triumph or success, that she kind of came to her senses, or, she's prayed the prayer that she should have prayed or something. But like, it's such if your brain isn't broken by evangelicalism, it's really clear how awful it is.
Yeah, you know, that scene where the little girl prays the sinner's prayer is so wild too, because what stuck out to me, like immediately grabbed my attention, was that okay, so it's like her mom, her sister, and her, the little girl. They're all sitting on a couch,
Mm-hmm.
and she's like really shaken up because she just thought everyone vanished and she's alone in the world, which is exactly the most terrifying idea for a child, and I remember that feeling very distinctly.
Mm-hmm.
But she's sitting on the couch, and she's like, okay, I want to ask Jesus into my heart, and her mom's like, oh, you know how to do it. You know the words. And it's,
Yeah.
I hate it so much because like, she's exactly right. Like if you go to an evangelical church, that's like the one thing that you do know how to do.
Right.
Out of all of the Bible-y things that you might have learned, you know, you learned about the uplifting verses in the Bible and all like the wild Bible stories or whatever. But the only one thing you really know how to do, like the only words that you kind of have for yourself and to understand yourself theologically and like religiously are the sinner's prayer, and that's bad.
Right.
It's bad so much.
Yeah, I think so. I couldn't get over just how I don't know. I think when you're in it, especially if you're younger, all that stuff seems like the most natural thing in the world, right? Like you get the
Yeah,
equation, like you're bad and like God's good and like God will help you out, but you just got to do the right stuff and then everything will be balanced. Like the balance sheet will come out right. And of course, there's lots of problems that might come after that or whatever. But the logic of it kind of makes sense inside. But when you're looking at it from the outside, like in this film, it looks like a scene of like child abuse or like cultic kind of really weird like ritualistic sort of I don't know like created trauma for no reason at all, which is really unsettling.
yeah, it is super unsettling. I mean, the movie is funny and silly, and I did say I love it, and I still stand by that. But um, as a product of evangelicalism, and like, I mean, my church wasn't super into sort of end times theology, but there was a certain amount of it just kind of in the air.
Yeah.
This movie is like also extremely triggering.
Yeah, it is.
It's scary because of that trauma, not because of the rapture itself. Woof.
That's
There was
right.
something you said a minute ago, though, that really made me think. You did say it was kind of like a speculative documentary, or it's, this is a movie that tells you how evangelicals think about the rest of the world. And I think that's really true. There's this quote from Stuart Hall, who is like a big deal media theorist.
Hmm.
You might have heard of him, or maybe you didn't. And if you didn't, this is a good plug. Take a media studies class in college. Keep me in business. Okay. But anyways, he has this quote that's about violence on television, and basically the idea is that he's responding to the idea that like violence on TV causes you to be a violent person. And he's like, no, that's not true. Actually, when you see violence on TV, it really is just like an example of what people think about violence or what they think violence actually is, in contrast to what it might be materially or economically or something. And I think this film is actually a really good example of that too. It's like it's an example of not the way the world actually is, not even the way that like Christian theology works, but it is an example of the way that evangelicals think the world works.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think that's part of why it is so silly and campy and funny, because to be an evangelical, you have to accept a lot of things that are silly, campy, and funny, but you think that they're real.
Yeah, well, we should talk about that Not Quite a Man, Not Quite a Boy character some more, because he's a great example of that.
Yeah.
Like he is basically always shown like sitting under a tree, like Jesus Christ, basically, like he's this enlightened being, and people just kind of gather around him, like more or less naturally, to sort of hear him calmly explain what he believes about the Bible. And like some people are into it and they're like hanging on every word, and then other people are like more skeptical, but they're still pretty polite. Like they're like whatever. And there's a moment when one of the characters becomes a Christian, one of Patty's friends, like we said earlier, accepts Jesus Christ as her one Lord and one Savior. And she like comes up and hangs out with that guy again, and he's like, hey, has anybody been like giving you grief since you became a Christian? And she's like, no, not at all, actually, which I loved. And then he goes, yeah, well, just like be on your guard, because the devil wants to take that stuff away from you. And I love it because the evangelical sort of picture is that like evangelicals are these like brilliant people who just sort of exude like the secret knowledge that everyone wants and needs. And they can like, helpfully guide people through the challenges of being a Christian. It's just like a strange kind of, even like weird self-portrait, you know, that evangelicals often have this kind of feeling of self-importance or like a cosmic significance.
Yeah, I think that's right. That guy, the the not a boy, not yet a man, Bible guy. I knew that guy for sure in youth group. I can exactly picture who he is, and he has all of like the best secrets. He's on the Bible quizzing team. He knows everything that's going on here. It lends itself to a sort of self-assuredness about the world, and an undeserved self-assuredness, and I think it's bad. Cool. What do you think about the ending of the movie, Dean? So Patty, she goes through this whole thing. She gets chased down by Unite, the one world government that is a thinly veiled reference to communism. And she eventually falls off this bridge to kind of like, to get away from being captured, or she's pushed off the bridge or whatever. It's kind of a tad ambiguous or whatever. Yeah. But then she wakes up. She wakes up like as if all the things that just happened in the film were a dream, which is a trope I hate. That's fine. And then she learns, though, that actually it's not a dream and the rapture did happen. And she has her chance now to kind of do it all over again, which that is actually a trope I do like. It's a dream, but actually it's real is kind of awesome. And she lets out this like the movie ends with this kind of amazing like chilling, blood curdling scream from Patty.
Yeah, it's horrifying.
It is really horrifying. And it's actually all real. So that's kind of cool. I don't know. What do you think of the end?
I'll say I have two things about it. The first is that the last scene with her screaming as she listens to the radio was genuinely scary. I found it like actually unsettling. And that was something I kind of didn't expect, actually. So that was pretty wild. But also it's weird because it like her waking up from the dream and then starting the day over and repeating it was a very like weird Groundhog Day kind of moment, or like a Twilight Zone episode situation. It almost feels even like if you've seen that show Russian Doll on Netflix, where she dies and has to repeat her birthday every day. Yeah. It's like the same kind of feeling, and it's really weird. Like, I don't know, it almost makes the rest of the film kind of even more interesting to think of it as like the beginning of a Groundhog's Day cycle. Like, how's she gonna play through the rapture again and again and again until I guess she like gets saved or something? I don't know. It's a really bizarre ending, but very, very funny.
Yeah, if the rapture was a video game, it'd be an episode of Black Mirror. Yeah, well, it's a neat ending. I think it's good. Like I said, I mean, the movie is campy and silly, but it has some impulses in it that are pretty scary, actually. If you think about it hard enough, it's definitely very scary.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's certainly a feeling of like loneliness and alienation. She like doesn't get the mark of the beast, which is actually the computer binary for 666. I loved that. That was very funny. One guy, they're like marking all the people, and you can get it on the back of your hand or your forehead, and somebody gets it on the back of your hand, and this one guy, like old guy, sits down and they're like, hand or forehead, and he's like, I'm not afraid to be known as a citizen, put it right in my forehead. They couldn't be more excited to get it. I love that. But yeah, that feeling of terror is definitely real. And I thought that was pretty interesting too, the way that they played that out.
Yeah, for sure. There's a lot to be said too about the movie's 1984-ness, and it's like it's sort of anti-communism, the mark of the beast, and the sort of like big one world government party kind of thing is very much a communist stand-in, but it's not super interesting, at least not to me right now. Maybe in the time it was like more obvious to people or more scary to people, but now not so much. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, it's weird to look at this as something that precedes like the Left Behind series and things like that, because Left Behind takes all this imagery and then ramps it up, and then that has become the sort of canonical fictionalized version of all this stuff, the rapture and everything else. But seeing this as before that, or as like the seeds of all that stuff, I think is kind of interesting. Because there's a lot of interpretive work, even if you're like a weird dispensationalist and you think that, this is how the end times are going to play out, to create like the character of a guy who's like the head of the UN, and like 666 has to be disguised because everyone knows what it is, so it's just computer binary, like all that kind of thing is pretty interesting even for the 70s.
Yeah.
It's kind of like forward thinking in a perverse way.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. Well, now that we've bullshitted about this movie for about 30 minutes, 36 minutes, um, maybe we can bring our academic, smart guy, Christian Marxist kind of reading to the film.
Okay.
Can we shift gears in that direction?
Sure.
Thank you for consenting to my one world government of this podcast.
That's right. Unite.
Yeah. Well, so I watched this movie and, right, like I said, I relived all the trauma from my past. I thought about church camp. I thought about all these terrible things. It was all very bad for me. But I did think about one other thing too, and that was William Connolly's Evangelical Capitalist Resonance Machine, which is an essay we talked a little bit about when we talked about Tad DeLay's book forever ago. That's right. If you have a Magnificast bingo card out there, we did just say Tad DeLay, so you can mark that one off your bingo card. There's this really interesting part, though, of the Evangelical Capitalist Resonance Machine where Connolly talks a lot about the second coming and the rapture and left behind and how important that is. Not just important, but how actually foundational it is to evangelicalism. So maybe coming off of this big evangelical thing we did, it's probably a good thing to revisit and maybe help us analyze the film even just a bit more. So I'm going to just go ahead and read it. Is that cool?
Yes.
Thank you. Again, you didn't have decision. It's just me, the one world government over here. All right. So this is what Connolly says. The cutting edge of the evangelical right is organized around a vision of the second coming, dramatized in the best-selling series of novels Left Behind. But it's basically exactly the same as this movie. The series has sold more than 50 million copies to date. In the first novel itself, titled Left Behind, millions of born-again Christians around the world are lifted suddenly to heaven during the rapture. The rest of humanity is, quote, left behind. The most significant thing about the heartfelt promise of the rapture, Christo-terrorism and the day of judgment, is not the horrendous future it anticipates, though that is notable. It is its effect upon the current conduct of millions of people who entertain the vision. To embrace this vision is to place a series of defiled doctrines, institutions, and constituencies under daily suspicion. It is to foment a collective will to revenge against non-believers, held to be responsible for the time of tribulation and obstacles to future bliss awaiting believers. To be born again is to be protected. It is also to adopt unquestioning obedience to those ordained to interpret the will of Christ before the rapture. Okay, so Connolly's talking about Left Behind, but like all of the same themes and stuff is present in A Thief in the Night. A Thief in the Night in every single way it precedes Left Behind. It's doing it all first, just long before, but it doesn't matter. But I think the point still stands that that the tribulation, right, the times that follow the rapture aren't the big emphasis, even though the last half of the movie is dedicated towards those ideas. Instead, it's kind of about thinking about all of those people that will just kind of go along with it, right? There's sort of like a mass culture critique to it, that there's all these just like mindless drones out there who are willing to do whatever the government tells them to do. And I think that's really wrapped up in the anti-communist ideas of that type of genre of literature too. But to be born again, to be a Christian, to be evangelical, is to give your obedience to a different set of people, a different types of authority. And it's interesting because it gets worked out into being that like obedience to like very conservative values. It gets worked out to be countercultural. And I think that's a really fascinating like sleight of hand in all of this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's right. That counterculturalism, it's weird because this film too is bound up in that in some ways, right? Like the song that you mentioned earlier by Larry Norman is often noted as like one of the first Christian rock songs, because like rock music is supposed to be countercultural and Christians didn't like it. But then like Larry Norman himself as a Christian rock and roll guy was kind of had like mixed reception among Christians, some of which thought that he was like cool and some of which they didn't, because they still didn't like rock and roll music or whatever. You can kind of see that here, like the film itself. You were telling me, doing a little research before this, Matt, that a lot of folks, this was like the first movie they had ever seen in their whole life, which is really interesting too. So there's this strange play on like the narrative. You're right to say that it's a like a critique of mass culture, and it's kind of like it's all about the secret knowledge, the minority of evangelicalism kind of being right after all. But at the same time, it's like evangelicals' first kind of foray into like being a mass culture, a mass produced form of that like niche culture or something.
Yeah, I think that the media history of this movie actually matters a lot for its reception and kind of figuring out like what role it plays in the psyche or whatever of evangelicals at the time. Of course, like that's my, I mean, I do like media history, so of course, like that's my take, but I think it's important. So, I mean, like really quickly, I guess if you're not super familiar with like, American Protestantism in the 60s or fundamentalism in the 60s and 70s, um, for a whole bunch of denominations and faith communities, etc., movies were taboo. You couldn't go see them. They were the work of the devil. That was the community of the religious denomination I come out of, the Nazarenes. That was definitely the case with them, that you couldn't see movies, even though I could. It was kind of like over as a thing by the 90s. But before that, you couldn't see movies. But what's really interesting though is that after World War II, for some reason or another, the U.S. Army ended up donating a ton of film projectors and equipment to churches and schools, because I guess it was like a place you could give surplus to. I don't know. Who knows how that works out? But but that's really interesting because like all of these churches had access to a film projector, though they weren't like people who watched movies. So when this movie comes out, it was like, one of the only movies available to people who are in these religious communities, fundamentalists or, mainline Protestants or otherwise, the one they couldn't go to see any of the other movies, but this is the one they could see. And like, it just so happened that their church was going to show it or something. So, kids who aren't even, kids in the 70s who aren't even allowed to go see The Sound of Music or whatever, could sit in their church with their youth group and watch A Thief in the Night. So pretty wild.
Yeah, it is. I mean, you mentioned earlier in that Connolly article, Left Behind, he said the series at that time that he had written the article had sold more than 50 million copies. But there are estimates that like this film was shown way, 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 way more than that. It's hard to get like an exact read on how many people had seen this movie for exactly that reason that you're saying, because they would just screen it in churches and they couldn't keep track of that the way they can keep track of like box office sales.
Yeah, no one's doing sales for this one.
Yeah, who knows how they calculate these kinds of things, but the highest estimate that I could find online was 300 million screenings of the film.
It's too many screenings.
Yeah. I mean, no matter what, it severely outpaces even the influence of Left Behind, if that's the case.
Yeah. I mean, I think that I don't know. I imagine that our listenership has probably never heard of this movie or seen this movie, and maybe you have. Good for you. But I would imagine that Left Behind is a way more relevant cultural touchstone. But this is the movie that started it all.
Right. Well, there's a really great article on it that I found called "The End Is Always With Us: The 40th Anniversary of A Thief in the Night" by Amy Frycombe on religionandpolitics.org. And she has this quote from a religion scholar named John Wallace, who says, just as Alfred North Whitehead said that all of philosophy is a footnote to Plato, so we might say that all of evangelical Christian film is a footnote to A Thief in the Night. Which is a pretty amazing thing. And I mean, that's probably true of evangelical Christian film, but I think you might even be able to say something like a lot of evangelical Christian theology about like the end times seems to also be a footnote to A Thief in the Night. Like the Schofield Bible or whatever is one thing, but having it visually shown to you like this is another thing entirely.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, I've been working on this, a little bit of research about media history and churches and sort of like the pedagogical role that film and drama, theater has ended up playing in sort of their pedagogies. And I think that you're exactly right. I think that A Thief in the Night is probably a really influential tool for a lot of older evangelicals, for sure. Yeah, absolutely. I don't know. It's at least true in my experience, right? Like I'm a person who's too young to have actually seen the movie when it was relevant. And now I'm watching it as an adult, and I'm recognizing all of these things in it that I'm like that are exactly like I remember church being. So it's very much the case that this movie is playing in the minds of older evangelical Christians as they do church.
Yeah, it's really fascinating too, because even in that way, there's very little in this film that's like really, I mean, a lot of it is like scary or whatever just by virtue of the subject matter, but very little in it is kind of morally objectionable. Like, they could make a movie about the time before the rapture where everyone is just like sinning off the wall or whatever. Like sometimes that happens in like evangelical fiction. Like they'll just show people, I don't know, like somebody dressing a little too promiscuously or whatever. But the bizarre thing about A Thief in the Night, there is one shot where somebody is dead and they're like being wheeled out on a cart. They were like shot by the government. But apart from that, everything else is pretty chill. And even like Patty and her husband, so her husband gets raptured because he had accepted Christ and she didn't, because she's like an intelligent person. They are like, there's a photo montage of their relationship after they get married, and it's like the most wholesome thing that you could ever watch. It's like a series of photos of just them like doing the dishes and like hanging out in like nice clothes. Like they're just like normal middle class, like suburbanite, like waspy people basically. And I think that's actually probably one of the most interesting things about this film. Like Patty's like a completely normal person, and she's the person who gets left behind precisely because like being a good person might even be more dangerous because you don't know what you don't know.
Well, Patty has these other friends in the movie too, whose names I don't know. It's a woman who doesn't think Christianity is very cool, and man with sideburns, and I don't know their character names. They end up joining Unite, the Mark of the Beast bad guys in the end. And like the film takes such length to demonstrate that Patty's burden after the rapture is so intense because like she knows what she needs to do, but she kind of refuses to do it. And yeah, just like you said, like being a good person is just too hard or whatever. But it's so weird because even after the rapture, it's not like she goes and accepts Jesus Christ as her only Lord and only Savior. She just like, I don't know, runs away and like tries to get away from it. I mean, like the Wikipedia article writer is correct in that she is the peculiar type of person who won't take the mark of the beast for whatever reason, but also won't accept Jesus Christ as her only Lord and only Savior. And it's very interesting.
Yeah, it's weird because the movie has a hard time kind of explaining what it wants you to think about her, even as a character, right? Because she makes the wrong choice. She doesn't accept Christ, but she's like a likable person.
Yeah.
So then you sympathize with her at the end because Unite is bad, right? It's led by the Antichrist, and they're persecuting this woman that like you've been told to like. But she's also not in heaven and apparently doesn't have a way to get there. So it's strange. Like, it's almost like it can't let you revel in the suffering of people who deserve it or something like that. But it also can't let you get like too attached to them either. It's really weird in that way.
Yeah, totally. The Patty is also they write her as a frustrating character too, because she is like, she's definitely the person that you, a regular Christian, is supposed to identify with the most, right? Like, it's like, you go to United Methodist Church, you're Episcopalian, you read the Bible, you go to church on Sundays, you're a good person, right? Wrong. You haven't accepted Jesus Christ as your only Lord and Savior. And it's just like, oh, it's so annoying. Get real. Like what difference does it actually make whether or not you've like said the magical words or what? Like it's just such a weird theology, a weird thing in Christianity where you have to say these like, I don't know, the spell. So Jesus like, knows who you are, and reading the Bible and trying to be a good person just isn't good enough. And like, screw you,
well, evangelicalism. It's like a theology of pure control, right? Because you just have to get somebody to do the thing that you tell them to do for no reason. There's no good reason behind it. And if you don't do that thing, then not only are you actually, not going to go to heaven, like you get left behind, but also you're probably not as good as you think you are.
Yeah, totally. I mean, but that's terrorism, though. That's exactly the logic of terrorism. Like, you do this or you'll like suffer this really horrible thing. It's like super manipulative. It's like it's not like legitimate. It's like a weird type of like abuse that you just kind of like live into and become acculturated to.
Yeah, it's really interesting too. I think this movie is actually really good to watch if you don't know anything about evangelicalism, honestly, because like so many of the scripted conversations that they have are scripted in such a way that this is what an evangelical thinks will happen when they start telling you about what they think. Like, this is what they want to occur. So there's a scene where the conservative pastor guy or the fundamentalist pastor is converting Patty's husband, and he's like listening and nodding, and he's like, yeah, that makes a bit of sense. And he like raises a couple objections, like philosophical objections, and the pastor just deals with them pretty handily. Like, he's got some good canned responses. Patty, the whole time, she's just like obstinately convinced that she's a good person, and the nut can't be cracked or whatever. And then one day it's too late. I think it's actually a really good example of like how evangelicals kind of understand themselves moving about the world and what they hope to get out of their bizarre like Bible studies.
Yeah, exactly. Even, I mean, that's totally true. It's exactly what evangelicals think and how it's the lines they will give you for sure. Even though they're like poorly delivered, it's the lines that they will give you for sure. It's crazy.
Also poorly delivered in real life.
That's true. They're bad actors all the time.
Well, as we're coming down to close to the end here, I did want to point out 2 fun facts that I learned about this movie.
Oh, yeah.
Fun, I guess, is maybe not the best adjective, but one is that the woman who played Patty, her name was Patty Dunning, like her real name was Patty, and the character's name is Patty. She became a Christian while doing it. She was not a Christian when she got cast as the lead. It was just a job, she said in some interviews. But she became a Christian after that, and then did a bunch of movies until later on in like the 4th or 5th movie. I guess these movies were causing a strain on her marriage. So they wrote her out of the series by having her killed.
Poor Patty.
So there's one. Poor Patty. The second is that Russell Doughton, who is a writer and a producer of A Thief in the Night, and he also stars as the liberal pastor who gets left behind, and he shows up, I guess, in the rest of the series too. He was also a producer and director of the famous horror film The Blob.
It's amazing.
I think so.
It makes complete sense too.
Yeah. Like, they're using real, actual horror techniques in this movie, for instance, that you can tell are carried over from somebody who spent time, making movies before there were just Christian movies.
That's right. Well, Dean, to round this one out, how would you rate this film?
Oh my gosh. How would I rate this? How many stars would I leave behind in my review?
How many Bob the Tomatoes would you give this one?
How many?
That's for our Christian movie review site, Bob Tomatoes.
Yeah. It's tough because there's so many categories to rate it on. Family friendliness, graphic scenes, truth quality. I think overall I'd probably rate it a 3 out of 5 Bob the Tomatoes. Mostly for okay, the three tomatoes all correspond to 3 specific things. In fact, those are what earned the tomatoes. The first is the Groundhog Day mechanic. Love it. I was impressed. I'm into it. The second is the Sideburns character. When he starts dating one of the other characters, has this really great impression of an old-timey crooner that he keeps using as a romantic line, and I love that. Great, solid tomato earning quality. And the last tomato, for sure, is definitely earned by the liberal pastor's actually good sermon in the film that unfortunately did not go recognized as a good one.
Right, yeah, that's good. Okay.
How about you, Matt? What do you give it?
Yeah, I'm going to give this one, okay, so all the things you just said, totally true. I'm going to give it, though, 4 Bob the Tomatoes out of 5, because it actually is super scary to me, but for all the wrong reasons.
Yeah.
I think it did actually achieve its goal. I mean, if the goal of the film is to be a horror movie, it's not explicitly the goal, but it is kind of. It did just scare the shit out of me. Just remembering all of what this was like. I don't think I really understood the trauma of evangelicalism until I kind of had to relive it all through this movie. And it's the scariest thing. It's the spookiest and scariest thing. So there we go. Thanks for listening to the Magnificast. If you like what you heard, and this time you definitely did with this spooky, scary movie, you can support us on Patreon, patreon.com/the Magnificast. If you can't do that, that's cool too. You can also give us a new rating on Apple Podcasts. That's right. iTunes is gone. Apple Podcasts is a new thing, and you can give us reviews on it, and we'd really appreciate that. Cool. The intro stuff you heard was from A Thief in the Night, but usually the intro music is by Mario Armstrong, and the outro music is by The Illogical Spoon. So there you go. Cool. We'll see you next week with more spooky, scary content.
Heaven come to earth and there won't be no church. We'll meet down by the riverside. There we'll swim with all creation. Never get tired, never bored. Don't worry, someday there'll be no dam between us and our Lord. Jackson, keep your hoods up. Keep your hoods up and you stay up late. In Jackson, you keep your hoods up. Well, you keep your hoods up and you stay up late. Oh, don't mind a cold night, but we might mind if you leave too soon. So come on now, it's still early.